Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Liam McGee. I'm a Senior Support Analyst over at Maestro. And today I'm going to go through the changes in 3.7 regarding the roster and the scheduler and how they are now going to interact with, how they can interact with one another a little bit more seamlessly than they were before. First, we're just going to go through a few changes that are located solely within the roster. And in order to explain that, first we're going to go to the setup page and look at rostering setup, see some of the new settings that are coming in there. So as we've got it all loaded up, this area here is essentially the same. There's no change here. But you will notice that there is a table in the in the center here called roster work groups. Now, the idea of work groups are a way to sort of divide your staff within a certain department or departments without having to create new departments to divide them. So for a few of the examples that we got here, we've created a so for all bases in the pilot department, we've created a work group for captains, and let's say I could create another one for first officers in the pilot department. This means that I would be able to then divide the pilots that are in any base into either captain or first officers. So without having to put them in their own separate department, they can then sit in the same department but be grouped. Now, you may have noticed when I was sort of setting that up, there's a start date and an end date. That's to allow you to create like a temporary work group. So if you want one to sort of deactivate or like go away after a certain time, you can give it a time frame here. And the sort number, it starts off at 9999, but you could actually, put like a 1 and a 2 if you want to sort the number, if you want to, prioritize one being above the other. So it's giving it a sort order within that department. So now that we've set that up, let's have a look in the roster to see where that how that displays. So if we go to the roster, then we'll go to the Adelaide department and expand the pilot department. See here that we've got these blue lines. This is what a work group looks like. Now, earlier I've added, before the webinar, I went ahead and I added a few people to the captain one, but you can also, but adding someone to a work group is as easy as right-clicking on the person, going to change work group, and then changing them to where they need to be. And that changes their work group. You can also tour a work group. So if you want him to only be there for, say, like a week, just do that. And he moves up to that work group for a week, and then he'll return to where he was supposed to be later on, just like regular touring. But the lines here are to denote that like they're in a different work group as opposed to regular touring where it will show you like the name of a base. Another thing that you might notice that has changed in the roster is these little coloured boxes up here. These are referring to engineering endorsements. So we've got a few work groups in here as well. But if I expand one of the groups, we've got a few engineers that have a few endorsements and licenses in their profile at the moment. So where this comes from, I'll show you by going back to my tab that's not the roster, and I'll go to, what was it, Joanne, Citizens Profile. And go to her engineering endorsements. Now, engineering endorsements has actually been in the site for a while, so I believe we may have like a webinar on explaining those as well. So I won't go into too much detail about this screen, but if you set up, say, your license types and your endorsements here, it will then reflect that in here. So what this is reflecting here is the airframe type. So you got your, so I think this is an endorsement category and the airframe types within them. And yeah, so this is a kind of these two are the different endorsement types, and these are the or airframe types, and these are the types of licenses that they've got under those, or rating that they've got. So at this stage, it's only for engineers. So it's only to show what engineers are endorsed in, to allow you to roster them effectively to work on particular aircraft, and you know what skills you've got amongst your engineers without having to look anywhere else. You just be able to see it from here. So that's it for the roster only changes. So next we're going to quickly we're going to jump over to the other tab. We're going to create another tab because we're going to do a little bit of a side-by-side between going to the scheduler, going to operations scheduling, and then jumping to another tab and going to the scheduling settings. Just so we could do a little bit of a side-by-side once we get to looking at a specific type of scheduled task. First, we're looking at the global settings in the scheduler and see what's changed here. So we've got a fair few things that have come in. So now you've got the so there's this field here which allows you to link a time custom field from a form to the task as well. So, and I think it appears, yeah, so it'll link so I'll just read this out. Select a time custom field to modify the end time of the scheduled tasks that are linked to the forms. This is calculated by adding the duration of the custom field value on top of the scheduled task start time. Example, task starting at 0600, which is linked to a form with a time custom field, is set to 0200. Given this, the task will end at 0800. To show this is on the scheduler, the linked actual time checkbox under display settings. So this is so this is something that's referring to if you're using forms with the scheduler. There's this option here to display the actual aircraft and PIC. That's to see if it's when you're looking at a scheduled task, say if we jump back to the scheduler here and we click on this, you'll see it shows you the aircraft and the pilot in command. But if that was to change in, say, the timesheet and the flight record that's attached to that, it will show that instead to give you an idea of what actually happened from the visibility of the scheduler. Never assume all-day task. If you tick this box, it just means that the all-day task box in a scheduled task will not be ticked by default. So this box here. Enable work practice validation for the resource picker. What that's referring to is if you go to resources here, so the resource tab always did sort of look at the work practices and recency, as you can set some validation to see, like, you know, what recency and stuff they should have to make them applicable for the task. But they've also got some. We've also improved the way that it works with work practices. As you can see, it now displays a little bit more closer to the way it does in the roster and in the timesheets. So before it was a rather basic sort of view, and I didn't actually show you all of the rules. Now it shows you all the rules that you've got in your work practices for that task, and it will show you the day before and the day after if it affects anything. So there may not be anything for this day, but on this day, the only thing that's really worth jumping into is the amount of duty that's going to be added, and the fact that the medical still isn't done. But what the setting that we were referring to here, this the resource picker, sorry, the validation, is that it's going to automatically validate and check these rules from here to see whether or not they're wrong. This one here, if you have this box ticked, it will always validate them, like as you select them, and otherwise you can actually manually validate them by clicking this button, and it just sort of goes through, looks at all the rules and sees whether and checks whether or not there's any changes there. Exclude any mandatory custom fields during validation checks. So this is referring to validating the scheduled task in general. If we were to tick this box, it would just mean so validating all of the scheduled tasks like that you've got for like this particular period. Sorry, that's what I meant. If you were to have some mandatory fields in the additional information tab, ticking the box here would exclude them. So filling them out wouldn't cause it to go red. The reason for that might be that so I guess a use case for that would be if you've got information in there that should be mandatory, but you don't have it when you're first creating the task. That's a way of sort of getting past that scenario. Now, by validating, by hitting validation, you'll see that this page looks a little different than it did beforehand. So this is to speed up the whole validation process. But yeah, it opens up a little window which you could sort of minimize and close from here. And you can actually filter by what you actually want to see in terms of if you only want to see exceedances, you filter by that, and it shows you who's exceeding where. So it's showing you in what days in that range there was any reds, and you can look at the tasks that they were on. Click on that. It gives you a quick chance to make any changes to that. There's a little change to the resource screen as well. Resource picker page size is just like the size of the amount of people that you can select at sorry, the available list of people. It shows like up to 20 at the moment, but you can expand that to, I don't know what the maximum is. 100. 100's the maximum there. 20 though. Scheduled hours cut off by, yeah. So this one, what this one's about. So this one's getting into a little bit more of the integrating with the roster. So when you when you schedule a flight, the flight hours and the duty times will actually pre-populate into the timesheet, which is what I'll show you in a moment. And this setting here is referring to a time like saying up to a maximum of 14 days. It will hold on to that information to show you that this is what it's rostered to do. So it will show you that they were scheduled for that day for, like, 4 hours of duty and 2 hours of flight time. And it will show that in the timesheet until a maximum of 14 days after. So whatever you specify here is a number of days after that task was supposed to have been completed. Otherwise, it will then zero out, and they'll just have to enter that manually through their flight record. Consider scheduling recency when validating resourcing requirements on tasks. So for this, just open the tooltip for this. Essentially, what it's telling you here is that when you schedule a recency item using recency scheduling, and it's you're scheduling a task sometime in the future, and while between now and then a recency will expire, but you've scheduled it to be completed before the task. It will then take that into account and say that, okay, well, they should be good for this, so then we're going to allow them to be on this task in the event that everything goes to plan. So that's the case for that. So this area here is a bit different as well. So these ones are about the same, except there's this option here to say display task time zones on task body. So this is referring to if you were to change the time zones of a task here, it will show those time zones in the task body as opposed to the time zone that you've selected for the scheduler itself. Aircraft tasks. So it displays the aircraft start time, aircraft end time, and what time zones that they're in, or display the departure arrival time zone as well. And then other tasks, so aircraft tasks is the ones with aircraft present in there. And other tasks, start time, end time, same as it's saying whether or not you're displaying the start time in the task time zone. You want it to either be the same as the start time zone, or you can choose UTC, the scheduler time zone, which is referring to the time zone up here. Task time zone, which is what you chose for in the task itself, or the home base or touring base when, like that, if the pilot's touring, it's going to use a time zone from that base as well, which is set up in the location setup. But that's something that's sort of always been there. The sunrise sunset options are about the same. There's a few more differences as we come down. Publishing. Now, whether or not you're familiar with the rosters side of things, the rostering module has something called publishing, and we're bringing that to the scheduler. What publishing is if you've got it turned on, it means that whatever you enter in the scheduler won't necessarily be visible on the pilot's schedule or your staff's schedule at first, until you decide that you're going to publish it. So that means that, like, they won't know what times and stuff or whether or not they're working until you will go ahead and publish that, until you've sorted out the pattern, made sure that everything's compliant, everything's all set up, and then you're happy to let everyone know that what the schedule is for that time period. So in the roster, you choose a range, but in the scheduler, where we're doing it a little bit different here, where you choose a date, and everything before that date will be published, and will always be published once you make changes. As long as beyond that date, as long as before that date, it will always be visible from that point on. So that's in there, and it's also up here too. So this is what you would normally be using to republish, but from the setting here, you can actually do the publishing as well if you wanted to. It's more for when you turn it on the first time. Next, we're going to have a look at. So I'm going to briefly explain what this is, and then I'll actually demonstrate it in a moment as well. But acknowledgement. We've added acknowledgements to scheduling now. So what acknowledgements are they are allowing you to, so essentially what it does is that once you create a task or you make a change to a task, you can now have the pilots or staff come into our Maestro and acknowledge that change or acknowledge that task. What will happen is that for them on their schedule, they'll show something. It will show green if they have acknowledged it, yellow if they haven't. You can choose whatever color. We've just got it as green and yellow. You can send reminders, and they'll be in these templates here. So either SMS or email. You can also have an urgent acknowledgement reminder as well, which is also done by email or SMS. So next we're going to go to the task type setup because there's no changes in the status setup. In this screen here, there's not too much that has changed except for this one thing. If you're turning acknowledgement on, you have to make sure that you turn it on for the task type in here. But then we'll be jumping into the example task type that we've got set up, which is the ad hoc one. Now you might find that there's a few more bells and whistles that have been added to this setup screen. So bear with me as I talk you through a few of them. But updating flight hours from legs by default and route by default, that's actually more or less the same than it always has been, where essentially we jump back into this task. Filtered. Yeah, if you were to update this, it should go ahead and pre-populate the flight hours and the route. So that's always been sort of the same. Default task time zone could either be the scheduler time zone, which is again the time zone up here, or a time zone that you specify from here. So that would say that from now on, whenever I create an ad hoc flight task, it should then default to Adelaide. Default task status, we've got it so it's default to confirmed, but you can choose any status that it will start off with when you create it, so you don't have to select the status. Legs use predefined locations. You tick this box. What this refers to is this will then use a set of locations that you've entered before, and it will actually, I think it also takes it from the locations as well. So from the locations in the site, it will grab that. So then you can all the bases, sorry, in the site. So you can grab that, and so to stop people from having to type the name in, it makes them select from a list instead. Legs use predefined link task times with leg times. Yeah, this means, what that means here is that the timings here, if you were to tick that box like we have, it would say it would change the time. So the start time would be affected by this, by the start of the first leg, and the end time would be the end of the last leg. Default task names means whenever you create a task, it will end up having the name that you specify here. Otherwise, it will just be blank. And then you just type it in yourself. Default task start and end times from roster code, if applicable. So what that's referring to is something that will provide more context with over here. So if we jump all the way over to the right, we'll see here is we've got a roster code, and essentially we're saying that we're going to whatever our duty is that we're entering from the task, so that's the start time and the end time of the task would be the duty, would be what is entered into the as the shift that goes directly into the roster code that we've selected here. So what that's doing here is that we jump over to the duty day. So at the moment, by default, we've got it say that the duties is going to be like 9 to 5. So if we were to tick this box, it will always say that the task start and end would be 9 to 5. Otherwise, if we're not, essentially it's going to override what times that are in this with whatever we've entered in the task start and end in here, which could be affected by these legs as well if we've got the boxes ticked. Also, we've got this pre and post duty thing here. So this is in reference to a small, like a bit of a requirement for when you're calculating FTP, you're saying that it's like 15, it includes 15 minutes before a flight and 30 minutes after for, you know, setup and then clean up afterwards. You could predefine as many minutes as you want on either side. And what that's going to do is that that's going to add that to the rostered time. Not so much the task time, but the rostered time. So the time that will actually jump into the timesheet. Time zone is the saying whether or not you're wanting it to go by the base, the task. So the task means, like, you know, whatever you define in the task, or none, and it will just not do anything. You could also tick that, say, departure and arrival location time zones. And then there's this work practice composite here. We jump back to, sorry, the roster. You may have noticed this in when interacting with work practices, but there's these little radio buttons, and you know, you've got the predefined set of the rules. When if you select home, you'll have different rest rules, and what if you select away, and same with this edition 11 FCM thing here, it would say like they would have different rules that apply. What you're doing here in this setup is that if you type in the composite name and the composite setting, so for this one, you would probably say additional FCMs, and then you would say one additional FCM in here. It will make a checkbox appear. So then you can tick that box and say that you are, yeah, that you're using that set of those rules. So to sort of demonstrate what we've done here with these tasks, we'll go also to the resources. You'll notice that one thing here, say for Nina over here, we've ticked this override shift button. What that's referring to is being able to override some of the settings that we've got in the default here. So that would be overriding some of the settings that we've got here, just for the one person. So it could be that maybe she's starting and ending a little bit later. So we'll just add, or like, you know, her times might be a little bit different, and we're going to use a different shift code for her because it's more indicative of what she actually did, of what she's going to be doing that day. You can override the shift like that per resource. So let's just go to Alex's timesheets to sort of show how that would appear, to sort of give you a bit more of an understanding as to what it's doing. So we've attached the this task type, so which is this task, the ad hoc flight, to this roster shift code, the duty day. So what should happen now is that if we look at what date was it? The 13th. Look at the 13th on a timesheet. We'll see that it has now the duty day rostered there with the times that we've entered as well. And you'll see that the times may be slightly different from here because it's adding the you know, minusing the 15 minutes beforehand and adding the 30 minutes afterwards to show the what the actual times would be for that. So yeah, so it's placing that shift code in there. And if we look at her roster for the 13th as well, where are we? Yeah, here, 13th, you'll see that she's got that shift code in there as well. So in a way, it's sort of stopping you from having to do double entry. If you're someone that's preferring to do, that prefers to use the scheduler as opposed to the roster, but you still want that little want to be able to like verify whether or not they're breaking any rules and such. you would then probably want to set this up. So then that way it's more streamlined. So further to this, if we just quickly go down, scroll down, we'll see some familiar settings here. And then down the bottom, we've got these settings here for default acknowledgement. So these are some settings per task type about that acknowledgement that we mentioned beforehand. So asking how many days before the start of the task should a change require acknowledgement. So when do you want to start pestering your staff to acknowledge the task? What fields should require, if you were to change any of the fields that you specify here, you select the ones that you want to acknowledge, people to acknowledge that you've made the change to. You also, if you tick this box, you can also choose from all of the custom fields that you've entered for this task type as well. You can add reminders. So for, say 24 hours beforehand, they'll get a reminder that they can acknowledge as well. If they haven't acknowledged it, they also get a reminder, and it's email or SMS. And this is a template to say, like, this is what the email will contain, this is what the SMS will contain. Now, to sort of demonstrate the acknowledgement, I've actually set up another task here, which is this one here in yellow. It's another ad hoc task that I've added to Alex. So if we go ahead and we hit edit task, we see that there's a tab here. This allows you to change change what this how acknowledgement works for this particular instance of the task of the task type. So this particular task here, because you could choose what's in the setup like we've got here. That's what this that's what this one's doing here. Or if we use specific acknowledgement settings, we can change it just for this task only. So this is set up and it's turned yellow because someone needs to acknowledge it. So we're going to jump back to Alex's profile. We're going to jump to the schedule. And we'll see there's this task here on the 15th. There's a yellow task here. So if she right clicks this now, she can choose to acknowledge it. And it will go green to show that she has acknowledged that task. And then she could also unacknowledge it as well if she's actually got some questions. Finally, there's this acknowledgement report. It's a tab up here, which will show you who hasn't acknowledged it based on the filter that you've got at the top. You can choose to add some notes. You can send an urgent reminder or acknowledge it on her behalf if you want as well. Next, you've also got the duty change report. What this means is that if we just have a look at it for maybe next couple of weeks, and we just want to say, we'll just choose Alex as well. Hit generate. This shows you, it's sort of like an audit trail of changes that have been made to the task to tasks featuring the people that you've specified. What time the changes were made, or sorry, what details were in there. So what it was started off as, and so when it was modified, what the changes were. Just showing you that information. You can export it to an Excel as well. The very last thing I want to just quickly show you is that we've got some new filtering options for the roster as well. So I've selected this one here, which is base department resource. So if we want to check this in Auckland as well, hit apply filters. We've got this option here where you can actually collapse departments or bases. You also have the ability to filter per person. So if you're just looking for a particular person, you can go this way. When you're using this particular grouping, where it shows a person via the individual as opposed to being on month or something, it will also show whether their acknowledgement status as well. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you later.